Hello, I'm Sally Pointer. Now, if you do historical costuming, the odds are that you've got quite a lot of woolly stockings hanging around, some of which may not be worth wearing anymore. And these are expensive things, even if you're buying the machine-made version. It seems such a shame not to put them to use. There are things you can do with them though. If you have a look at the length of a stocking, there is plenty there to make sleeves with. And there is a historic precedence for this. You get knitted sleeves in the 16th century, there are waistcoats with knitted sleeves that have converted from stockings in the 18th century. There's lots of ways you can rehash these to make something interesting. Now today I'm going to be using a pair of stockings that actually I never quite finished, because this particular pair I knitted one end a little bit too long, so I took them off the needles and I put them by, and I thought I'll come back to those later. But they're going to be perfect for my demonstration of how to make a really straightforward pair of knitted sleeves using stocking legs. Now the first thing we want to do is level up the stockings. Don't be tempted to try them on your arm yet, because if you do, the top end, this end, will stretch out and that will distort your view of what's going on with the length of the stocking. The first thing to do is just to make sure you've got as much material available as possible. Now the vast majority of historic stockings are knit from the top, from the cuff, down, which means they're going to unravel from the foot up. So the first thing to do is just to level up your pair of stockings. So start at the top, make sure they're nice and level, smooth them down really nicely, go down as far as you can. Actually I've twisted that so the foot's in the wrong place, but just smooth them out so that you've got an equal representation of your stockings. And then when you get down to the, probably it's going to be the ankle bit, which is where there's no wear and tear on the heel, but things haven't got too fulled, you're going to take a pair of shears to them. Now try as best you can to cut straight across a row. It's not that you can't unravel differently later, but this is going to make life just a little tiny bit easier. And try your best to do the other one at the same level. And that's going to give you two really long lengths that at the moment are exactly the same length. This is going to make life much easier. And now we get to the bit where you can try one on. So take one of them, pull it up, right up into the top of your armpit. Almost all of these styles, if you're sewing them into a waistcoat, you'll be sewing on around here. If you're going to be pinning it into the top of a kirtle, you still need it to be right up into the armpit. Work your way down, work out where your wrist is, and really you want to be coming to sort of this bony bit on your wrist for measuring purposes. So work out where that is, stick a pin in it, and then you can take the sleeve back off. Now, the reason I said earlier not to try this on before you've measured your stockings, I'll show you now. If I put these side by side at the top, come down to the bottom, can you see how the one that I've worn has stretched upwards? So this is why we've done it that way. And now what we're going to do is unravel the top. Now you might find that the very first row has got lots of little cut threads in it. That's all right, just keep picking away at it until you get a strand that will unravel nicely. Don't worry if the first few little bits of this are a bit scrappy. Once it starts unravelling, you're going to be absolutely fine. I'm going to change camera angle so we can see what's going on. So I had to unravel maybe 1.5 rounds before I got to the bit where it would run easily. And from here on in, I'm going to be winding up my yarn, and I'm going to be pretty much keeping track of how many rounds I'm unraveling. So it's taking me 2 to get to that. That's 3. Wind up my yarn. Good trick with winding yarn is to wind over the tip of your thumb. That stops you overstretching it, and it stops it getting out of shape. There's another round. So I'm on 4 there. 5 rounds. Keep winding it up. 6 rounds, and so on. And I'm going to keep going all the way up to that pin, keeping track. Once I know how many rounds to unravel here, if I unravel the same number of rounds on the second stocking, I'm going to know I'm pretty much starting from the same point. From there on in, we can start re-knitting. I should say, while I'm unraveling, if the idea of counting that is just too much for you, there is really no reason why you shouldn't try on both sleeves and mark the wrists, but there is always a chance that they're not going to be precisely the same length. So at the end of the day, whatever makes sense to you, I tend to count coming back up, but I'll also match up the lengths at the end to make sure that we're pretty much right. Just be aware that if you just try on one sleeve, it's going to be a slightly different length than the other one. Once you unravel both to the same length, you need to pick up onto knitting needles. Now I'm using circulars here because they just happen to be to hand in the right size. Doesn't matter if you prefer double-ended, double-pointed knitting needles. Now for the stockings that I make on my hand-cranked antique knitting machines, I found that a 2mm knitting needle will give you as close a gauge as makes no difference. Something in that region is going to be all right. You also need to know how many stitches you've got around. I've got 84 in my case. And the other thing to be aware of is the direction of knit. Now, if yours were made on an antique machine, you might find that actually, when you come to look at them, the thread's coming from the wrong direction. Now, you can either do slip stitch, wrap the thread, put it back, and then you're going in the right direction, so knit and turn, don't worry about that. Or, if you just turn the work round to the other side and work from the inside at the back of the round, you'll find that will work out exactly right without any problem. So just fudge it, really. It's not going to matter. Do whatever you need to do to get the knitting working in a direction that you're comfortable with. So what pattern to do on the wrist? Well, the first thing to do is check the sizing, and this is where your offcuts come in handy because you can try them on without stretching. Now, that would make quite a nice loose cuff. So if I was just doing something very, very workaday, I could just do a couple of purl rounds, couple of plain rounds, couple of purl rounds, cast off. Keep it that simple. That would be very nice, actually, if you were doing a 18th century waistcoat sleeve. Some of the Tudor ones have a very plain edge. Some of them have a fancy frill, and I think I'm going to do a frill today. But for me, I'd like to bring this in a little bit. I can take up a bit there. So without over forcing it, I'm just going to check where I can take that in. Eyeball, without over counting it, how many stitches I can take off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So somewhere between 12 and 14 stitches. Now, let's call it 12. That makes the maths easy. I've got 84 here. So if I lose 4 stitches on my first round, 4 on the second, 4 on the third, that will slightly taper in my cuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what's essentially a purl round, but in my case, because I'm going to start knitting from the inside, it's going to be a knit. Again, whatever works for you. I'm going to do a round, which will show as purl on this side, where I lose 4 stitches. So every 20th stitch, if I knit 2 together, that will end up losing 4. I'll do the same on the next row, which will show as a plain row. I'll do the same on the third row, which will be a purl row. That will narrow me in, and then we'll decide on the pattern from there. Clear as mud, make it up as you go along. Pretty sure they did too. So that bit's done. 1 purl row, 1 plain row, 1 purl row. Excuse the state of my nails, I've been dying with madder. More about that later. I've also done my 12 decreases over the 3 rows, spreading them out so they don't line up, so I should be down to 72 stitches now. So I'm still making the pattern up as I go along, but I think probably I'm going to do either the 3 or 5 plain rows, then another repeat of this, and we'll have a look at it. Well, so far so good. So in the end we've ended up with purl, plain, purl, 3 rows of plain, purl, plain, purl, 3 rows of plain, purl, plain, purl. And I could stop there if I wanted to. If I wanted a plain cuff, casting off loosely would be absolutely fine. I want a frill though. What I'm going to do is one more plain row, just to get everything pointing in the right direction. And then I'm going to knit into every single stitch. I'm going to make one increase where you pick up the bar behind each stitch and knit into it. So my 72 stitches will become 144, I think. And then I am going to knit plain for about that height. So that's probably going to be around about 15 rounds. And I think to avoid too much curling, you know how stockinette curls, I think probably every 4th round I might make a purl round. I'll see how I feel when I get to that stage. So one more plain round just to get things nice and lined up. Then I'm going to double every single stitch. I'm going to make one into every stitch. That will make enough increases for my frill to spring out nicely, and we'll have a look in a moment. And that's very nearly there. So in the end we got our increased row, 3 plain, 1 purl, 3 plain, 1 purl, 3 plain, 1 purl, a plain, a purl, and now I'm starting the bind off row. So when I finish casting off, you'll see there's going to be rather cute little frill at the top. So I will finish this, I will make the other one to match, then we'll have a look at the top edge just in case it needs a tab, but otherwise we're very nearly there. There we are. That'll be a lot better when it's had a wash to settle it in. I've decided against tabs on the top. These particular sleeves have got really long cuffs, but you know, there's nothing to have stopped me taking that bit off the top, adding a garter stitch tab, which you do see on the originals. Here's an example. This is a hand knitted sleeve and it's got a garter stitch tab at the top, which could be tapered, could be just a little straight tab. So if you need extra length, pick up some stitches, pop a tab on the top. Don't overthink it. The next thing to do is wash these, which will settle all the stitches in really nicely. I'm also going to dye these. So they're going to have a wash. They're going to go into some mordant overnight, so into some alum. And then I've been dyeing some hats in various shades of madder over the last day or two. I'm going to use up the exhaust of the dye, and hopefully we'll get a nice light orangey tone when this is dyed tomorrow. It's the next morning now. The sleeves have been in mordant overnight, so in an alum solution. They've been well rinsed to make sure there's no stray particles of mordant sticking to them. The dye bath is warm, it's an exhaust dye, so who knows what colour we're going to get. Well, that's looking quite promising. Right, we'll give that a couple of hours on the warming plate, and then we'll see what we've ended up with. If it stays anything like that, I'm going to be very happy indeed. Excellent. Well, these are straight out of the dye bath, and if nothing else, they are an exercise in never believe your madder bath's exhausted until it really is. Look at the colour of those. I'm really pleased with how these have come out. It's a very simple interpretation. It's not specifically based on a known set of sleeves, although it has broad similarities with some extant ones. But from a pair of dead stockings to hopefully a very wearable pair of sleeves for an afternoon's work, this is something that's well worth doing. Go on, bit of recycling, bit of reusing, bit of repurposing, and a good opportunity to get the dyes out. There we go. That's a look back, does it? I'm really pleased with how those came out. So, pin in the top. That cuff tends to fold in. You've got your little frilly edges. Of course, it will look even better with a proper kirtle and smock and all the rest of it. But for now, I think that's a good day's work. Bye for now.